the next presenter, which is Katarzyna. She has created the International Peace and Conflict Studies program at Collegium Civitas in Warsaw, Poland, and is currently supervising the program. She also serves as the Director of Analysis and the Senior Editor in the Analytical Center of Polityka Insight. Katarzyna was a Fulbright Scholar at the Kroc Institute for International Studies at the University of Notre Dame in the USA in 2014 to 2015. In 2018, she was GMF Marshall Memorial Fellow. For more than 7 years, she worked in the National Security Bureau Strategic Analysis Department, focusing on the former Soviet Union, NATO-Russia relations, international peace and security organization, and arms control. She also served as Program Development Advisor in the Peace and Stabilization Program in the Casimir Pulaski Foundation, and worked as a journalist in the Polish newspaper Dziennik Gazeta Prawna. In 2015, she conducted her field research and cooperated with human rights organizations in Israel, Palestine. She graduated from Lazarski University, Warsaw, and from the University of Notre Dame. And now I'll give Katarzyna the word.
So many words, hard to pronounce, I know. So it's Katarzyna, or shortly Kasia. Thank you very much, Sean, for the invitation. I feel really honored that I can be here with you today. And thank you very much for organizing this event. I do believe that the event and the number of participants are showing that peace research is getting more and more attention that I feel is definitely needed. My talk today will be about nonviolent resistance. So probably connected to Rina's research topics as well, because this is the topic of people's power, civil movements. You can say that since I'm from Poland, because this is what you know from the difficult names, I couldn't choose a different topic than nonviolent resistance. Poland is the birthplace of Solidarity movement, one of the biggest and successful nonviolent movements. It was Solidarity that changed my country's history and even the region, and it was people's power that was one of the root causes of the fall of communism in this part of the world. So definitely that's one of the answers why I'm talking about nonviolent resistance, but it's not just that. It was peace research and peace studies in general that shaped my way of thinking. You can say that even my life and how I see the world. When you observe what is currently happening around the world, you see in different parts of the world people fighting for their rights, people fighting for change. And I believe that peace studies are the best at explaining the root causes, the effects of such actions, but also the conditions necessary for the change. So let me share with you a story, how I got to this point. To this research topic, to these research questions. At the beginning of my professional path, I was more connected to international relations and to the policy level. I was always interested in global issues, and one of my first jobs or positions was a position in the National Security Bureau of Poland. Sounds terrifying, but I'm not a spy. National Security Bureau, this is an analytical institution advising the President of Poland. And I was working on the issues connected to the former Soviet Union, but also peace organizations and arms control. And, you know, the work was hard, but also interesting. But at some point, I felt that something was missing. Something was missing in my understanding of the field, and something was missing in the discussions that we were having in Poland. And I realized what was missing when I entered Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame as a Fulbright Scholar. These were peace studies, or the concepts, theories, perspectives, and also research. and the holistic and strategic approach building in general by professors including Trites or Jerry Powell. The approach, what they taught me, showed me or allowed me to see a different perspective of conflicts and also social change. The approach that resonated with me more than the ones I am used to do. So what I did, I started digging into the topics that interested me the most. So in general, the root causes of violence, but also the root causes of people's power and the strength of civilians in making positive changes. And here comes the research. And the research is definitely connected to the current events. When you, I don't know, start your morning with reading the news or listening to the podcasts, you can see that in different parts of the world, and this is what I mentioned at the beginning, we can see people, civilians, fighting for their rights. We can see the US and the anti-discrimination movement, also connected to the movement of Black Lives Matter. But also we can see women marching in Poland for their rights, and similar protests and movements in different parts of the world. But also we can see changes in the former Soviet Union, in Russia and Belarus. And what happened in Belarus, that was, you can say, my moment. I'm not sure if you have ever experienced that. The moment when you feel that you can finally connect the dots. So when the protests started in August last year in Belarus, that was my moment. That was my moment when I realized that I can finally connect my knowledge, experience connected to the former Soviet Union, so the understanding of the region, to my knowledge and experience connected to peace and conflict studies. Observers, the protests started, for those of you who are not familiar with the case, the protests started after the presidential elections. And many observers thought that elections would be different that year, but they didn't expect that it would have a long-lasting effect. What happened? Usually passive society decided to say, finally, no to the regime, to the authorities. People that have never before thought about taking part in the movements and protests took the streets. And it didn't stop after a few days, it didn't stop after a few weeks, and it didn't stop after a few months. So the questions, many questions remained when I saw that. Will this be enough for a change in Belarus? And the second question, can we expect that the changes will also happen in Russia? So these were my initial research questions. Now, obviously, I'm not the only person in the world digging into this topic. Nonviolent resistance, this is the topic also of the research done by different scholars in different parts of the world. So, what do we know? So what do we already know about nonviolent movements? Researchers like Jean Sharp have been dealing with the topic for years, but it was only in 2011 when large studies comparing nonviolent movements and violent movements were published. Movements and their effectiveness. There were two authors who are really important when we talk about this topic, Erika Chenoweth and Maria Stephan. And they analyzed, and it was, the biggest research. They analyzed more than 320 movements, both nonviolent and violent movements, in the 20th century, from 1900 to 2006. And what were the results? Well, you can say that the results for many, even political scientists, were shocking. There are two main points that we all should remember, especially if we are interested in social changes and making the world more peaceful. The first one is that non-violent movements, protests, were twice as effective as the violent ones. What it means for us? It means that if we really want to make changes, we'd better use non-violent means because they're more effective. And the research, well, the authors analyzed more than 300 movements, so not just a few. What was also interesting is that non-violence worked even in really, you can say, hard cases, like the regime change. So non-violent actions were also more effective in regime change than violent ones. So that's the first piece of information that we have to remember. And first piece of information that we have also because of the peace research and the field. The second one is that the main factor that makes peaceful protests more effective than violent ones is their ability to attract more people. What it means in practice? Well, if you want to fight using, violence, you have to have some abilities. You have to know how to, use a gun, etc. So not all the people can participate in such, movements. Whereas when we think about non-violent protests, where there are so many options, the movement can choose a color. So you can participate by, wearing the clothes in the color of the movement. You can go to the streets and protest. Your movement can use boycotts, etc. So young people, old people, all people from all gender, etc. all can participate. There are almost no boundaries in participation. There is one number that is crucial because, when we talk about research, we really like numbers, don't we? So 3.5% of the population. When 3.5% of population is taking active part in the movement, you can say that it guarantees success. So if you check what is happening currently in different parts of the world, you can measure what are the prospects for the future. So the research that Chenoweth and Stefan showed and published, that was, a wake-up call, or you can say a breaking point. More and more people started digging into the topic. It wasn't, the end of the research. Well, finally we know non-violence is better. No, that was, the beginning of the next step, you can say. Because there were so many questions, after the research. Or what are other factors? What about external support? If, let's say, actors from abroad are helping the movement, is this important or no? Well, the author, Chenoweth and Stefan, a few weeks, I think, ago, published the second book on external support, and contrary to what people usually feel and think, and especially, the authorities, well, no, external support, it's not a crucial factor. Without the strength of people, civilians, external support, you can say, is nothing. But of course, there are some ways how we from abroad can help people to fight for their rights. So for me, it was also a starting point with, of course, lots of questions. When I think about Russia and Belarus, that's my, regional area of interest. There's one main question. Can civil resistance change Russia and Belarus? And I talk about these two countries because there's a union between these two countries into democracies. If it's possible that civil resistance will change Russia and Belarus into democracies. And this main question can be followed by more specific questions. So why have societies not resisted earlier in a scale similar to what we now see in these countries? What is necessary for a nonviolent movement to be successful in the former Soviet Union? Because there are differences between, countries and regions. And what is so unique about Russia and Belarus that it makes difficult for these countries to follow the patterns of other countries from the region? When we think about 1989 and 90s and the fall of communism, Poland moved towards democracy. The Baltic states moved to democracy, and they were in the former Soviet Union. Why not Russia? Why not Belarus? My initial hypothesis, because I have one, what diminishes people's ability to resist, because that's really important. What diminishes our ability, because we all have this ability to resist. So I have three, let's say, ideas or research ideas. One is that it's because of the overwhelming violence employed by authorities in different forms and at different levels. When you think about Russia, you have to remember about the Gulag, structural violence, etc. The second, the acceptance of the use of violence on an everyday basis. And the third one, the lack of peace education and even talks about peace. I have many students from the former Soviet Union in my classes, and for many of them, my class is the first time in their life when they actually can talk about peace. And when they can talk about violence, and they can get knowledge about what violence is, what are the types of violence. So, there are still many questions. I obviously do not have all the answers. Well, if I knew them, I wouldn't be here. Because this event is about research. So, questions to be answered, not the answers that we already have. However, I'm sure that this would be, nonviolent resistance, people's power, and the state's actions towards citizens. That would be one of the main research topics in the coming years in peace and conflict studies, but also in other disciplines. And definitely it will be my topic. So thank you very much. Sean.